Hello, Michael Tracy here. So I was in Montana last week covering the special election. You might have seen some of our video reports or our Medium posts from that coverage. And I wanted to talk about something that has been discussed in the aftermath of the election result, which was that the Republican Greg Gianforte, who chokeslammed or body slammed or did some kind of physically aggressive move on a reporter, he won that race by around 6 points. And in the aftermath, the DCCC, so the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, put out a memo basically proclaiming that they were very savvy and wise in not devoting as much resources to this Montana race as they are to the Georgia special election, which will conclude this coming month in June. After the race, the DCCC put out a memo in which it lauded itself as having, quote, refused to waste money on hype. So that's how it regarded the Rob Quist campaign all along, apparently, that it was based purely on hype and that he had no actual chance of winning the election. And yet, if you look at what the DCCC was saying to the people on its email list, they were soliciting donations for the Montana race literally up to the last minute. On May 25th, which was the day of the election in Montana, they were sending around urgent emails, screaming to recipients that they had to give more money because Democrats and the DCCC had to launch last-minute radio ads to get out the vote and to take down Gianforte. And yet, at the same time, as they were soliciting that money from people and conveying to those people that they viewed there to be a legitimate chance of actually winning the election, the chairman of the DCCC, who is Representative Lujan of New Mexico, he was stating that Quist stood little chance of winning, according to the New York Times, and that it was very wise and prudent for the DCCC to not invest nearly as much resources as they were in this Georgia congressional race. So when all is said and done, as of now, and this number is probably going to go up, the DCCC's spending in Georgia is 10 times higher than its spending in Montana. And again, this was as of last week. So once the race is actually concluded in Georgia, who knows what that figure will actually be. The point is, the DCCC is much, much, much more invested in the Montana race, in the Georgia race, than they are in the Montana race. And why might that be? Well, there are a couple reasons that you could contemplate here. One is that they genuinely believe that the Georgia race is more winnable for the Democrats than the Montana race, and therefore warrants more resources than the Montana race warrants. I mean, that would be the most simple explanation, but I think there is something to look at here in terms of the ideological component. Remember, the DCCC is an institution of the National Democratic Party. The National Democratic Party is interested in preserving its image and reputation and standing, and therefore it may want to devote more substantial resources to candidates who want to perpetuate the image and luster of the National Democratic Party. And they don't believe that Rob Quist represented that, which is sort of ironic because Rob Quist was selected by the establishment of the Montana Democratic Party because the special election, because of some of the minutia of how the law governs special elections for Congress in Montana, there was no primary election held. So what happened was that the Democratic Party in Montana got together and at a convention nominated Rob Quist. So it's not as if Rob Quist attained the position that he did based on some adversarial posture that he took toward the Democratic Party as such. And one thing that I think Quist could have done a little better over the course of the campaign, and I observed a number of his appearances and his ads and his debate performances. Very seldom did Quist say anything critical of the National Democratic Party, and the National Democratic Party is not popular. Especially, it's not popular in rural areas, such as in Montana, where it was an imperative for Democrats to at least make inroads in order to have a shot of winning the special election last week. Now, Quist did seem to energize the kind of Democratic-leaning enclaves within Montana, such as Missoula and Bozeman, to some extent. But that wasn't enough to get him over the edge. And I think he could have broadened his messaging to encompass more strident criticism of the National Party, which is viewed as decrepit and corrupt by so much of the populace. And yet he didn't really do that. So for the DCCC and the National Democrats to conclude that he wasn't a faithful steward of the party's image is ironic. And what this is doing now is it suggests that there's an ideological component here that is at least a factor in the decision-making of the National Party organs. So Quist, he was unabashedly a Bernie Sanders-style Democrat. Bernie Sanders campaigned with him. We covered some of those campaign appearances. He explicitly drew from Sanders' platform from the 2016 Democratic primary campaign in hopes that it would help Quist resonate among segments of the populace, which maybe are more favorably disposed to Sanders and don't like Democratic Party figureheads. And you can argue that it worked to some extent because there was an 8-point swing from the Hillary Clinton percentage of the vote in November of last year to Quist's percentage in the vote last week across all Montana counties, with the exception of Yellowstone County, which is a large county within Montana. So there was evidence that there was something gaining traction in Quist's messaging, at least enough that it conceivably would have warranted a substantial devotion of resources to the race by the DCCC. I mean, it's not like they have that much going on right now that they are, pressed for finances. I mean, the Democratic affiliated entities are raking in a lot of money now from people, from wealthy liberals who are, frustrated at not being able to do much, according by their lights now, to oppose the Trump agenda or the Republican agenda or whatever you want to call it. And yet the DCCC withheld money from Quist that really could have made the difference. In a special election, which is a low turnout race, and which is held on a Thursday. Now there was mail-in voting that people could do, but the actual in-person voting took place on a Thursday, which is obviously unusual. People aren't really familiar with what a special election even is for the most part, or who is contesting it. So there was a lot more that could have been done to activate some of the Democratic-leaning constituencies in Montana that are located outside the urban-ish centers. But Democrats apparently were not interested in doing that. And you have to ask why, and again, it gets back to this ideological component. Quist sort of represented, at least in the eyes of national observers, a move in direction away from the Clinton model of Democratic politics toward a more Bernie Sanders-oriented model. Now, that's sort of an oversimplification for reasons that I tried to explicate in the coverage. You can go look back on our channel for why I believe that's an oversimplification. But nevertheless, that's how it was perceived. Quist winning would be seen and interpreted by national observers as a triumph for the Bernie Sanders style of politics. And potentially that could have far-reaching implications in terms of races elsewhere in the country. Whereas Ossoff is, just sort of a down-the-line technocrat, rather uninteresting, I would say, not really attempting to broach any new territory in terms of his politicking. we'd be very comfortable existing within the Democratic establishment, and has so far, Ossoff has campaigned largely against Trump as a person, and tried to feed on the anti-Trump anger that's out there in the populace, especially in this kind of affluent suburban district that Ossoff is running in. Interestingly, Quist didn't talk all that much about Trump per se. He talked about certain policies that Trump is, supporting or trying to advance that Quist would portray as harmful to the Montana public. But he didn't go on and on about how Trump is personally disreputable. And Trump may well be personally disreputable. I mean, he is. But focusing so much and so incessantly on Trump as a person, and as on his personality traits and on his vulgarity, is not something that I think resonates in Montana as much as it might in some of these more affluent, liberal-leaning districts, such as the suburbs of Atlanta. And I think Democrats want to play up that angle as much as possible, meaning they want to play up Trump's personal unpopularity and use that for their own electoral ends. And that's reasonable enough, but it makes it so that Ossoff, who's I don't think identifies really as a staunch progressive in any way, and who is raking in the campaign contributions from aggrieved national liberals, that makes sort of his style of politicking much more in line with the mainline Democratic style of politicking, whereas Quist, at least, again, would have been portrayed as a departure from that. So I think there is an ideological component here that's sort of contributing to where National Democrats devote their resources. And again, I think there is a paradox that's worth at least acknowledging. Whereas Quist, I think, would have benefited from incorporating a critique of the Democratic Party into his campaign messaging, it has to be said that he then would go and benefit from an infusion of financial resources from the National Democratic Party. So on the one hand, it would have been better if he incorporated that criticism, but on the other, he would have benefited from those institutions, bolstering his candidacy. So yeah, there is a paradox there. But at the same time, I think it is pretty undeniable, at least to me, that more resources would have gone a long way in the Montana race. And actually at the Quist concession event on Thursday night, talking to Montana Democrats, some of whom were fairly prominent, who were saying that they were pissed off. I mean, that's the term that one person used about the DCCC and the National Democrats relenting on giving them the resources that they felt they needed and could have actually used to win the race. And I think, as much as people want to kind of write off this race as unwinnable for Democrats, I think there's a scenario where it could have been won. Would have been difficult, but with a more kind of finely tailored approach to courting some of these disaffected rural voters, I think Quist did stand a chance. But now you're seeing people like Joy Reid saying that this election result was a repudiation of the Bernie Sanders style of politics. Joy Reid said, quote, "This was a white election. There was no racial issue or identity politics." So she was trying to portray this as a test case for the style of Democratic electioneering that maybe diverges from the outmoded Clinton style. And she's now trying to, portray this as a loss for the Bernie Sanders wing of the party, or whatever you want to call it. And I just don't know if that's apt. Anyway, that'll do it for now. Let me know what you think. I mean, these thoughts are all tentative, but I did want to say something about how the aftermath of this race is being interpreted. I'll link to all the relevant sources in the description box. And that'll do it. Take care.